One of the biggest hits of the 1980s ended without a farewell episode, without a finale, and a proper goodbye. A show that once dominated NBC's schedule, that made a cultural icon out of a man with a mohawk and a van, was quietly canceled mid-season after a reinvention so badly misjudged it cut the audience in half. And to understand how it happened, you have to go back to where it all began. January 23, 1983. NBC quietly aired the 2-hour pilot episode of a new action series called The A-Team. The network was in trouble, struggling to compete with ABC and CBS, desperate for anything that might stick. This mid-season gamble looked like a long shot. Loud, brash, unapologetically cartoonish, it didn't fit the prestige-driven tone of early 80s television. But NBC had one card left to play. January 30th. Super Bowl XVII, Washington versus Miami, a game remembered for John Riggins' legendary fourth-quarter run. With 10 minutes left on the clock, the 240-pound fullback broke a tackle, found the sideline, and ran 43 yards to give Washington the lead they'd never surrender.
There's the snap, and Riggins good. Oh, he's got the first down for 40. He's gone! The 35, the 30, the 40. He's gone! He's gone! Touchdown, Washington Redskins! Holy cow!
More than 80 million viewers were glued to their screens, and when the final whistle blew, NBC funneled that entire audience straight into the second episode of The A-Team. By the end of Season 1, it was being called the hottest new show since Mork and Mindy. Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, shows that had ruled Tuesday nights for years, saw their ratings collapse almost overnight. NBC hadn't felt momentum like this in half a decade. The show that nobody expected had just become the show everybody was watching. The heart of The A-Team was its cast. 4 characters so distinct and so perfectly balanced that the chemistry felt almost accidental.
It's showtime! Now you all gonna be on the 10 o'clock news. It's a tough break. But that's show.
Colonel John Hannibal Smith led the charge, a silver-haired tactician with a cigar in his teeth and a plan for every situation. He wasn't just the leader, he was the conductor of the chaos, the man who could turn a hopeless scenario into a victory with nothing but confidence and duct tape. Templeton Face Peck brought the charm.
Why, you're a priest.
I'm sorry, but I can't keep from laughing whenever I hear that term applied to me.
You ain't a priest?
I don't know what.
If Hannibal was strategy, the Face was finesse. A smooth-talking con artist who could talk his way into a bank vault, a 5-star hotel, or a military base without breaking a sweat. Every episode handed him a new identity, a new scam, a new suit, and he wore each one like he'd been rehearsing it his whole life. Captain H.M. Howling Mad Murdock brought unpredictability.
Now, go in there and get your stuff. Don't mess around.
You know, I'm really gonna miss this place. And those warm nights in post, shock carving birds out of soap with blunt.
He was the pilot who might be a genius, might be insane, or might be both. One moment he was quoting Shakespeare, the next he was arguing with an invisible dog. But when the team needed a helicopter flown through a canyon at midnight, he was the one they trusted. NBC executives initially wanted the character of Murdock to be removed from the show because they felt that he was too over the top. But test audiences loved Murdock and gave him the highest ratings. And then there was B.A. Baracus. Played by Mr. T, he didn't just enter a scene, he took control of it. The gold chains, the mohawk, the scowl, a walking action figure, a superhero without the cape.
100%.
Sure, B.A., whatever you say. Remember, you're our leader.
Look, man, I know I exaggerate sometimes, but you do it all the time.
Yeah, well, actually, I always felt you had leadership potential.
Hey, man, we gotta find the fastest way possible to get to my mother.
That's gonna mean flying, big guy.
And here's something most people never knew. Those gold chains weren't a costume. Mr. T had been collecting them for years working as a bouncer, keeping jewelry left behind at clubs. He wore them as a deliberate symbol, his way of transforming the steel shackles of his ancestors into something that gleamed. Television had never seen anything quite like him. Together, these four weren't just characters. They were a formula, a blend of brains, charm, madness, and brute force. When they shared the screen, it felt like a rock band hitting the first chord of a stadium anthem. And then there was the van. A black and gray 1983 GMC Vandura with a bold red stripe down the side, red turbine wheels, and a front bull bar that looked like it was built to go through walls, because it usually was. That van wasn't just a vehicle, it was the fifth member of the team. If you grew up in the 80s, you didn't just watch the A-Team, you wanted to be in that van. The show's structure was unlike anything else on television. It delivered action without consequences, violence without blood, explosions without casualties. Critics rolled their eyes and called it a live-action cartoon, but audiences embraced it. In the early Reagan era, a time when patriotism, military swagger, and larger-than-life heroes were back in vogue, the A-Team was exactly what America wanted. Within months, the show wasn't just a TV series, it was a brand. Toy vans vanished from store shelves. Kids carried A-Team lunchboxes to school. Posters, bed sheets, action figures, Halloween costumes, a full juggernaut. Mr. T appeared on talk shows and magazine covers. For a brief, blazing moment, he was one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. The show's rhythm was part of its appeal. A helpless victim, a ruthless villain, a plan that seemed impossible. Then came the montage, welding, hammering, improvised engineering, followed by a final showdown where cars flipped, bullets flew, and everyone walked away. Predictable, yes, but that predictability was the point. It was the television equivalent of comfort food, familiar and satisfying in exactly the way viewers needed it to be. NBC needed it too. The A-Team became a cornerstone of the network's rebuilding strategy, helping pave the way for the renaissance that followed. The Cosby Show, Cheers, Family Ties. The show that had arrived as a long shot had helped save the network. For a while, it really did seem unstoppable. But beneath the surface, the seeds of its downfall were already taking root, and they were growing from two very different directions at once. The first was the television landscape itself. Family-centric sitcoms like Growing Pains, Who's the Boss, and The Golden Girls were pulling viewers toward warmer, more relatable stories. The Family Hour audience the A-Team had dominated was migrating to gentler territory. Then Miami Vice arrived with cinematic visuals, pop music soundtracks, a darker and more stylish tone. Suddenly, the A-Team looked old-fashioned. By season 4, the ratings had slipped out of the top 10, then the top 20, finishing the year around 30th place. By season 5, they had cratered to 61st, not fading, but in freefall. Viewership had been cut in half. The producers knew they needed to shake things up, so they made a drastic decision: reinvent the show from the ground up. The A-Team would no longer be fugitives helping the innocent. Instead, they were captured, court-martialed, and reassigned to covert missions under the command of General Hunt Stockwell, played by Robert Vaughn. A new team member, Frankie Santana, joined the lineup. The tone shifted from renegade adventure to something closer to bureaucratic espionage. Even the iconic van began to fade from view. The audience felt the change immediately. Viewers hadn't signed up for CIA-style operations or a fifth team member, and they certainly didn't want to see their heroes taking orders from a government handler. What they wanted was the original formula, the outlaw spirit, the montage, the plan coming together. Without it, the ratings collapsed even further. NBC had renewed the show partly out of loyalty to producer Stephen J. Cannell, and partly to push the series toward the lucrative 100-episode syndication threshold. But the reinvention backfired so badly that the network pulled the plug mid-season, leaving the show stranded at just 98 episodes. After 5 years and everything the show had given the network, it ended 2 episodes short of the number that would have secured its future in syndication. The cancellation felt abrupt because it was. One week the show was airing new episodes, the next, it simply wasn't. No farewell special, no final send-off. To make matters stranger, the last episode that aired, Without Reservations, was a leftover episode broadcast months after the show had effectively ended, and it had no sense of closure at all. The true thematic ending had come earlier, in an episode called The Gray Team, a surprisingly reflective hour that closed with the team choosing to remain free agents, helping the innocent on their own terms. Murdock even wore a shirt that said, Feeney. The show knew it was over. It just never got to say goodbye properly. But the ratings collapse wasn't the only thing tearing the A-Team apart. The second force was far more personal, and it had been building since almost the very beginning. The set had become a pressure cooker. The cheerful camaraderie on screen masked a far more complicated reality behind the cameras. The most infamous tension was between George Peppard and Mr. T. On paper, the perfect odd couple, the seasoned Hollywood veteran and the rising pop culture phenomenon. In practice, oil and water. You wouldn't know it from watching the show, but Peppard and Mr. T hated each other with passion. Peppard came from the old studio system, where leading men were groomed and revered. Mr. T was a force of nature whose charisma was so explosive it had practically rewritten the show around him. Peppard reportedly called Mr. T the worst actor on set in a magazine interview, and Mr. T responded by reading those quotes aloud on set. The two men communicated through intermediaries, and things got even worse when Peppard learned Mr. T was being paid more than he was. Actress Melinda Kulea, who played reporter Amy Allen, found herself caught in the crossfire. She reportedly wanted more involvement in the action, but according to her own account, Peppard made clear from the start she was not wanted or needed. Her lines were quietly edited out. Her screen time shrank. By early season 2, she was gone, officially for creative reasons, unofficially for political ones. As the seasons wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier. Long shooting days, physical demands, the pressure to maintain success, it all accumulated. The cast was aging. The stunts were getting harder. The scripts were growing more formulaic. What had once felt like a rocket ride now felt like a grind. By season 5, with the retooling and the new cast additions shifting the dynamic yet again, the joy had visibly gone out of it, and you could feel it on screen. When the cancellation finally came, it wasn't just the end of a television series. For many on that set, it was a release. You didn't just watch the A-Team, you lived inside it for an hour every week. You knew the plan was going to work, even when it looked impossible. And that certainty was the whole point. In a complicated world, these four guys always figured it out. They always came through. And for a generation of kids who needed exactly that, it was everything. What do you remember most about the A-Team? The van? The theme song? Mr. T ruling the world for a moment in time? If you love exploring the stories behind the shows that shaped a generation, make sure to like and subscribe.